Hey, sports fans, welcome to the Mr. Teacher, Mr. Preacher podcast and YouTube channel, where we are on a mission to learn what lasts in athletics and share it with you, the sports fans, the athletes, the coaches, the parents of the greater sporting world. Welcome on in. We are in our series on the Pyramid of Success, John Wooden's Pyramid of Success, specifically the third pillar of friendship, which is that respect and camaraderie. Comrades in arms that Wooden put third, right after industriousness and enthusiasm, which were the first two that we covered. In this deep read, we are going to be covering Coach Wooden and me, our 50-year friendship on and off the court. This is by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Last week, we covered The Good Life, which was the Harvard grant study, the largest and longest, I would say, probably not the largest, longitudinal study about happiness and what we learn about relationships. And now we're going to get into kind of more that player-coach relationship dynamic. Jake, you ready to roll?
Let's do it.
Good to see you. Let's do the thing. First off, before we get rolling into friendship and the book, we got to tell you where to get the book, and that is bookshop.org. And that is our independent book sale website that can get you books from retailers all across the country, specifically small bookstores. We like supporting those underdogs in the books selling world. And bookshop.org has you covered. So check out that link below. Go get Coach Wooden and Me, The Good Life, or any of the other books we have covered. It's a great way to support the authors, the independent bookstores, and the channel. We aren't sitting here going to sell a whole bunch of stuff to you, but we really do encourage you to read, especially if the topic lights your fire. So go to bookshop.org and get Coach Wooden and Me. Okay, Jake, let's get our audience and listeners engaged with these player-coach relationships by playing a game of player-coach pedestal. As I was thinking about how to start this, I didn't want to get into friendship right away. I just had the idea that we could debate this most certainly. Not only were Coach Wooden and Kareem friends, is there really a better player-coach pairing? I mean, I want to start there. You could probably make a case for Phil and MJ, Brady, Belichick. Is there anybody let's get out of the friendship world. Is there a better pairing than these two that I am just not aware of? Because it was top notch.
I think certainly in the college realm, I don't know that you're going to come anywhere near it. The other combo that comes to mind is Auerbach and Russell.
Yeah.
That echoes more of the Wooden-Kareem relationship to me than probably the other ones you mentioned. I'm trying to think of other popular or well-known coach-player.
I got a list. So I just couldn't fathom the success, but I have a few. And remember, we're looking at friendship. So like the idea of respect and camaraderie. So I don't necessarily need them to be buddies per se, but you could tell that there was a bond. All right. So I'll throw some at you and you just tell me if you think it's on tier or off tier.
Okay.
So does it meet the Kareem Wooden threshold? This kind of the thing. Doesn't have to be better than. So let's start at the beginning. How about Duncan and Greg Popovich? On tier or off tier?
I think it's on tier.
Okay.
I think there's a true relationship there. Yeah. Yep. Okay, keep going.
All right. Brady Belichick.
No. Interesting that we spent, especially towards the tail end of that partnership, people just talked about who was successful because of who. I mean, obviously that's outside of their control and whatever, but just I'm thinking public perception here.
Yeah. I still think they have the respect, but the camaraderie waned.
Yeah, definitely.
I think How about Kerr and Curry?
No.
No? Okay. People are just going to be firing like all sorts of hate mail at you. It's going to be great. This is what we do here. Phil and MJ. You're better basketball mind.
We're talking respect and camaraderie here. It's what's so interesting. The eras are so different. Like I think of MJ and Phil, and there was such a different competitive vibe versus Kerr and Curry. I feel like that relationship is so much more lovey-dovey than any other one that we're going to mention. And I think that's why I'm kind of like, yeah, no.
Okay.
But it's almost the Kerr and Curry thing perhaps is in a category of its own. I don't think it meets the threshold yet of Kareem and Wooden, but it's almost in a whole separate one. Like
Yeah.
we're looking at these other ones, and the competitive drive between the two individuals is so high. And then I look at that one, and it's not that they're not competitive; it's just such a different outward display of that than all the other ones. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, the friendship is accentuated more than the winning.
Yes.
Yeah, and so because they both won, maybe not to the degree. I mean, Kerr most certainly, but he wasn't obviously the athlete. Okay, well, how about Jeter and Torrey? I had to have a baseball one.
I was gonna say, I was wondering if you're gonna have a baseball one in there.
Yeah, I had a hard time picking because I was thinking, okay, I was thinking of great managers, and I'm like, well, that got to be pretty hard. There was no like, if a coach stuck out in baseball, the player didn't. If the player stuck out, the coach wasn't there long enough. You know what I mean? So it's this. But Jeter and Torrey, I mean, I guess I can't speak to this. Maybe the Yankee fans can tell us.
Yeah, I don't really know the relationship there. It just never gets any publicity really in baseball, and part of it's probably because baseball managers never stick around. There's no holding power in Major League Baseball with managers. So I'm going to say no, but I would be curious what the relationship was like.
Yeah. Somebody's got to let me know. There's got to be some out there. All right, next one, Manning Dungy.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh. I'm going to guess from a relationship standpoint, it's there. They certainly didn't have the kind of success that.
Yeah, well, they had Brady and Belichick against them, so they didn't get as many championships.
Sure.
They got one together? Or was it two? One.
One.
Yeah.
Just one.
And they were a machine, though. Magic and Riley.
Oh, no.
Okay. Elway Shanahan.
No.
Two more, because you've already mentioned one of them. This one was a little more current, but I felt it was appropriate. How about Nash and D'Antoni? I'm baiting you.
I'm going to say no.
They didn't ever get a championship, but there was
success
they were made for each other.
They definitely were made for each other from a style standpoint. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about it.
All right, well, I'll leave you the last one because I think it is a yes, because I only got four then. Is Russell and Red.
Yeah, I would argue that's in there. They're all very interesting to look at. I think what sticks out to me about most of them is it felt like they were held back by their egos at some point. Like I think about Brady and Belichick specifically because I think that's the most high profile one.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a lot of ego going on in that relationship where, yes, they had success together. Yes, it's a very popular and they probably do have respect and camaraderie and can sit in a room just fine. But there was like this ego bit.
I just can't.
Hard to get around.
I just can't see them sitting around drinking TB12 protein smoothies together. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I can see the player coach thing.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't see them going beyond that. Like,
Well, in fairness, can you see Bill Belichick going out with anyone and having a good time?
Not really.
Hey, Bill, how's it going? It's going fine.
Maybe that's a misunderstanding of him. I don't know. Maybe he purposely does that to protect himself and the players. I don't know. But the reason why this is helpful for everybody, for context, we start here, is this relationship between Kareem and Wooden is very unique. We just listen. Now, he played for him in college. I'll agree with that. And I just used professional ones because I didn't want any obscure college references that maybe anybody didn't know. But not only the endearment for each other, but the endurance. That sounds smart. I should do that again. But like the 50 years. So let's transition to this first draft reading. And when we do a deep read, we get into the topic, play a game, and then we kind of go through some of the more nuts and bolts of comprehension, this first draft reading. And our segment's called Puzzle the Preacher. So I summarize the book and then throw some factoids or different things at Jake just to give you an idea of the book. So what I want you to know, if you haven't read this book, a 50-year friendship on and off the court, that is unbelievable in any context. So this is Kareem talking. He's written several other books. I have not read them, but I'm much more curious having now read this one. But he says this book spans almost 50 years of an evolving friendship seen through the eyes of a man who is old enough and mature enough to understand the truth about our relationship. And we're going to get into that. He's very honest about his shortcomings, Wooden's shortcomings, and everything in between. Very, very honest and vulnerable book. Even when I was too young at the time to recognize those truths myself. Okay? Then we go to page 9. This is great. This is probably why this book is awesome for friendship. Coach Wooden was an old white Midwesterner with old-fashioned ideals. I was a quiet but cocky black kid from New York City who towered 18 inches over him. He was a devout Christian. I became a devout Muslim. He loved big band music of the swing era. I loved modern jazz. On paper, it's understandable that we would have a good working relationship as a coach and player. That makes sense. But nothing on that same paper would even hint that we would become a close friendship that would endure a lifetime. That is unbelievable to me. And he gets even a little bit more thorny later. But he said to me, like, he was so much more than a coach. And we're going to come back to that. He was a teacher, a friend, and a role model. He said our relationship had been born over basketball, but eventually that became the least important aspect of it. Super interesting to hear from that perspective. I'm going to leave that there. So the book is really a chronological examination through Kareem's life and how he first came in with Wooden when he was recruited through high school. And then he talks about his time previous to Wooden, with Wooden, and then through stages of his life. So kind of these different chapters, 7 chapters, I believe, main chapters, were periods of life as they first met, worked together, and you get all these glimpses into the historical background. And if you don't realize what that time was like, if you're a little bit younger listener and reader, you're going to get a lot of history and background. How far the world has come since the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
And what it was like to be a superstar, highly recruited kid from 14 years old onward. And then how they navigated. What I really liked about the book, if people are interested in this portion of it, is the political strife and like the political like divide at that time, very similar to today. And you have people on both aisles in terms of Kareem and Wooden, and yet they still were able to work that out. And that's what we're going to promise as we go through it. How did they do this? Like, that's what we're learning about friendship. How did they build camaraderie? How did they maintain respect despite differences? So we'll get to that, I promise. But let's puzzle the preacher, Jake. I got you. I'm going to pepper you. Some of these are lob balls, I'll admit. I'm giving you easy ones. But some of these ones you may not know, okay? So I'll walk you through. We're going to kind of blitzkrieg them because we got stuff to get to. Number 1, basketball was not John Wooden's first love. True or false?
True.
That is true. It was baseball. Number 2, spot the imposter. Which school was not one of Kareem's or Lou's at that time? College considerations. I know you're big into that recruiting thing. Michigan, Columbia, St. John's, UCLA, or Houston?
Columbia is so random; it has to be one that recruiting. Let's go Michigan.
It was actually Houston. I just threw that one in there because they lost to them for their winning streak. Yeah, he basically was told he could go wherever he wants to go to play basketball. And he did have criteria, but since we're focusing on friendship, I'm going to leave out how he made his selection. True or false? The UCLA Bruins under Wooden had no set plays.
False.
It's actually true.
None whatsoever? Not even like an inbounds play? Nothing?
Well, their offense didn't have a set play. So, like, it was jazz. Like, he taught them the fundamentals, probably like pick and roll, give, go, and they just had to read each other. And so they developed that, like, you know, improv jazz, which is what Kareem said. But that blew my mind. I'm like, there's no way. But yeah, no, they really didn't. Like, they had basic things, but he didn't call plays. That's probably why you saw his players so in tune with each other and in tune with the game. That's for another day.
Mm-hmm.
True or false? The lob pass was created at UCLA.
The lob pass meaning like an alley-oop or just like a pass that goes high in the air?
Like an alley-oop.
False.
It's actually true, but it wasn't with Kareem. I was going to screw with you on that, but yeah, it was created by two other players, and it was to showcase that Wooden was open to things, and that was like a showcase of the Jazz. They never practiced that. It just kind of happened, and he allowed it. So
I have to correct you. It's not true. It originated in Flint, Michigan, with Jackie Moon in the Flint Tropics. They threw the first alley-oop.
I'm not putting that movie into our set of anything.
Between Woody Harrelson and Andre 3000.
It's a good movie reference. Still not including it. That's good. It's good. We need more movies like that. True or false? Kareem interviewed Martin Luther King Jr.
I'll say true.
It is true. He was right in New York at that time and was starting to get involved in his later high school years with protests and things like that. And he did get an interview. True or false? Kareem was on the board that of prominent African-American men at the time, the way they say it, choosing whether to support Muhammad Ali for his protest against the Vietnam War. So at that time, Muhammad Ali wasn't going to go to Vietnam, and they were going to hear his reasoning or not. So was he on that board or not?
True.
It is true. And how young he was. I mean, he was, I forget the exact age. I'm not going to look it up. But I mean, he was not where you think he was. Like, he was very young. I think he was in his 20s. And he's with Jim Brown and all these. And so they were trying to come to a consensus how to support him publicly or not. That was really interesting. Cool thing. All right, spot the imposter. So Wooden had a number of superstitions. And the reason why we're going through a lot of these things about Wooden and Kareem is in a friendship, you get to know somebody, right? You know things about them that maybe not other people know. And that was from The Good Life, is that secret sharing. You kind of know like the subtle things to dig at people. So which of these things did Wooden not do before a game? Lifted up his socks, spit on the floor, rubbed the spit with his shoe, rubbed his hands, rolled his sleeves, and patted his assistant on the leg.
Well, he didn't pick up his socks.
He actually just didn't roll his sleeves because he was in like a tux or like a suit.
Oh.
So he wouldn't have done that. But he did all those things. And then he gave his, Nan the okay sign. True or false? Wooden had a superstition with hairpins.
False.
It is so true. Oh man, this was towards the end of the book, and it was hilarious. So this came from his daughter, and I found this unbelievably fascinating because you think of Wooden and you have this whole aura of him. It said every time he finds a hairpin, he has to stick it into the nearest piece of wood. Tree, table, porch, doesn't matter. His rationale was, I read that the St. Louis Cardinals used to do that, as if it was the most reasonable explanation in the world. This is funny. Nell, the daughter, said, sometimes on game day, I deliberately leave a hairpin lying around just so he can do that. I was so blown away. That was funny.
So he's a rather superstitious fellow.
Oh, he was probably more rigid than we could ever give him credit for. True or false? He Wooden nearly retired after Kareem.
True.
It is true. So he said that. He said winning, like before Kareem, everybody like it was great if you did win. Like nobody expected him to win. Once they got Kareem, it ruined it for him. He said winning wasn't about coaching; it was about getting the big guy the ball. Suddenly, we weren't playing to win; we were playing not to lose, and I hated that. And so they had these conversations after, obviously, they retired. Over under Jake 125. How many consecutive free throws did Wooden make? Was it in a game, a series of over 40 games? Was it over 125 or just under?
Over.
It is over. I think it was 143 consecutive free throws because Wooden I'm not going to true false you on this, elected into the Basketball Hall of Fame both as a player and a coach, along with
the other player coach, Pat Riley.
Wasn't Lenny Wilkins up there too?
Oh, Lenny Wilkins is probably up there too, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. All right, another over under because we're gonna keep growing. I don't even know how to describe over under 50,000 is how much more money did Dean Smith make than John Wooden? Over. It is over. So he made 85,000. This is in 70 something. Dean Smith made 85,000. John Wooden made 17,000.
Jesus. You wouldn't necessarily associate that with UCLA, would you?
No, not at all. But it tells you of the times. True or false? John Wooden was friends with Chuck Taylor of Converse fame.
Yeah, true.
He was, and it was a point of contention because they had to cut the shoes at a certain spot with razor blades. No kidding. Like a seam. They'd have to cut the seam, and the players were all about Adidas at that point.
Yep.
All right, true, false, only a few more. Kareem loved martial arts and actually trained under Bruce Lee.
True.
It is true. They were very good friends, and I'll get to a point about Bruce Lee later, but I did not know that. That was an interesting factoid. This one's a fill in the blank. This is not a lob ball. How many years did it take Wooden to win a national championship?
Oh. 8.
Add 10. 18 years.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
18 years. I don't know if he would survive in today's coaching landscape.
Oh, absolutely not. He would have been canned. He would have been canned at 3.
True or false? Wooden, after he retired and he's living in California, he ate at the same restaurant and ate the same meal every day.
True.
It is true. It was VIPs, and it was the number 2 special, but he didn't say what the number 2 special was.
Does that restaurant still exist?
I believe so. I didn't look it up. It became like one of my bucket lists. Like I gotta go there because they showed a picture in the book of like his spot, like his booth. But look it up. I'll ask you this. All right, if you can pay attention and multitask.
Yeah, go for it.
Spot the imposter, Jake. So as Wooden retired, all sorts of famous people came to meet him. Which person did not come to meet him? Michael Jackson, Bill Clinton, James Stewart, John Wayne, Matthew McConaughey.
Bill Clinton.
That is true. Good spot. No, Bill Clinton asked him to come speak or meet with him. And he's like, let me check my appointments. And he had some Division 2 or 3 girls basketball team he was going to speak to. So he told Bill Clinton to take a hike. Not in those words, but he's like, John, this is the president. I don't make changes to my appointments. Like,
who was he scheduled to talk with?
Bill Clinton. Or no, like it was a college girls basketball team. And he said no. He's like, I'm gonna go speak to the girls. They matter more. Like, no, I'm not changing that. I made a commitment.
Surprised Bill wasn't like, John, I'll come with to the talking.
Yeah. Next one. 3 more. Last 3. Over under 20 NBA players John Wooden produced.
Over.
It was 24. Good call. You did pretty good. All right, next one. Over under 95%. John Wooden's winning percentage at Pauley Pavilion.
I mean, I would have said over, but now that you just told me 18 years before he won a national championship, I kind of question. That's a high. I'm going to say under.
Well, Pauley Pavilion was built when Lou Alcindor came.
Doggone it.
He was
Doggone it.
149-2, Jake. 98.987 winning percentage. That is ridiculous. Now, last one. I'm going to kind of give it away. It's okay. The last player to score a point at Pauley Pavilion as it was a Wooden.
Really? True.
It is true. It was his grandson.
Wow.
And he was a bench player, and I think his name was Trapini. This was when Ben Howland was there. And the guy missed a last-minute, 3-point attempt, and it fell right into his hands, and he just put in a layup. So how fitting that a Wooden ended that. So, all right. So let's move to the second draft room. We're studying friendship. What do we learn?
Okay, hold on.
Oh,
I found it. It does exist. It's still out there. I found a menu from June 9th, 2023. It's called VIP's Cafe, Coach John Wooden's favorite spot. It's on Ventura Boulevard in Tarzana, California, excuse me. The number 2, the Coach Wooden special. 2 eggs, 2 strips of bacon, and an English muffin.
That just blows my mind. If you've eaten at VIPs and you've had the number 2, you need to let us know, because this is going to become on the list at some point.
We need to go there because
yes, we do.
They have your just general breakfast foods, right? And then they have their weekday specials. They have a random box that says weekday Chinese lunch specials.
Mm-hmm.
And then half the signature brunch favorites are Mexican. So it's an eclectic place.
Yeah. We'll take it. VIPs. I didn't need to bask in the ghost of John Wooden. But to start us off, we have 7 sections. Hopefully we'll get to all of them in enough depth, but we'll cover them, and then we'll flip over to the stages of friendship and the metaphor and what we got out of friendship. So let's dive into friendship. And the first segment is skyhooks and common denominators. So when we talk about Kareem and we talk about Wooden, we got to understand that they started as a player coach, and that's where their story starts. So Wooden was famous for saying, when worlds collide, a coach's primary function should not be to make better players, but to make better people. And he goes on later in the book, a couple pages into this first chapter, and we learn that Wooden became eventually, a teacher, a friend, and a role model, but it didn't start that way. And Kareem is very forthright about this concept that it is not all about what they eventually became. Their thing that they had in common was basketball, and that was really it. So I want to talk about the common denominator, which was and is basketball. So they had basketball in common, and that was really about it. But when you start off a friendship, that's really all you need. So among those things that Coach Wooden and I did have in common, besides all of our differences that we mentioned, was the belief that playing basketball wasn't the end, but rather the means to make our lives more fulfilling. And Kareem had a number of influences, especially through his coaches, but he said something very simple, and I want coaches and athletes to hear this. There are 2 ways that a great teacher, we'll use that synonymously with a coach, influences students. First, by the practical value of their words in teaching the student how to do things they couldn't do or can do now better. So you need the practical value to them. And if you're the adult in that relationship, you're there to mentor downwards. You're there to make them better. Second, through the purity of their actions. So it's not enough to know, you have to do. Coach Wooden taught me a lot about basketball, but more important was his example as a man of unbending moral strength, taught me to be the man I wanted to be and needed to be. And there is a case for teaching being a moral profession in this case. Like you cannot be more than who you are as a person.
Yep.
And I think the authenticity of Wooden, but to this point of Skyhooks, we gotta get to that in a moment. But priorities. So Wooden and Kareem both have priorities, and these fall under common denominators. Okay, so we have basketball in common. Wooden, this is what he told the freshmen at UCLA, which did not play in those days. They were just on the practice team. You couldn't play until you were a sophomore, which would have been a good true false. Wooden said, I don't drink and I don't smoke, and the only reason you have to be up beyond 9 or 10 o'clock is if you're studying. So he's setting the priorities here. He said, number 1 in your life is your family. Number 2 is the religion of your choice. Number 3 is your studies. You're here to get an education. Number 4 is to never forget that you represent this great university wherever you are, whatever you're doing. And number 5, if we have some time left over, we'll play some basketball. Now, I wish Kareem said he shared those priorities, but he had a couple of his own. He said, what exactly did I hope to learn from Coach Wooden? Now, this is him being the most recruited player in the country going to UCLA. What did he hope to learn? I wanted him to somehow translate my relentless desire to be a great player and my hope to surpass even my own expectations into practical skills. He'd watch Russell and Chamberlain when he was in New York. Like, he had a vision for being that next guy. Ball handling, shooting, setting picks, moving without the ball, teamwork, check, check, check. But there's something more I wanted from Wooden, something I couldn't articulate. I wanted the game to make sense in my life beyond just having a skill set. I wouldn't expect him to understand what I meant. He was old, my quotes, not his, an ancient 55 at the time. He couldn't possibly get what was going on inside a young man like me. So what do you think, first off, about common denominators before I get to the sky hook? What do you think of the common denominators between athletes, coaches, or just in general for friendship?
They're vital. I also think that in not having you kind of hinted at, in not having common denominators, it's a common denominator, right? And the fact that they were so different and they had such a different view of things, it is almost a bond in and to itself, because you have the opportunity to see through someone's eyes that's completely different from you. And I hope as a human being that is something that's interesting. I hope that's something that you pursue, because it's a healthy thing. It's certainly a very educational thing. So I found that the most interesting was you were talking in terms of common denominators, that our differences really can be a common denominator if we choose to look at it that way. It should spark curiosity in us almost of how did you come to that viewpoint? That's what I found most compelling in that.
Yeah, and that's something that comes up quite a bit in this, is that they're on the opposite ends of the spectrum for majority of things. Now, they had something that did bring them together. So it's almost like basketball was the magnet that brought them within each other's spheres, right? They were way over here, and then they're drawn in with this one thing. But they never judged each other. They all had curiosity, and we're going to get to that. But it's important that they had this, and we're going to cover crucibles and catalysts later, but things that started there. Yeah, they had a starting point. And we're going to see how they develop this friendship through beyond just basketball. One of the catalysts, or I will say the skyhook, so the common denominator that really catapult them in his basketball period, okay? There's a few, but this one had to do just with basketball, was the skyhook. So if you did not know, it was called the Lou Alcindor rule, or there was debated at the time. He learned the skyhook previous to this, but they banned dunking. And they thought this was deliberately aimed at him because of UCLA's dominance. Wooden was actually fearful they might raise the height of the basket or even ban him from the game. Like, it was that ridiculous how good he was. And so it was the skyhook that brought us together on the basketball court. Working on it gave us the opportunity to spend extended time together. And this is interesting. So we'll end this segment with this. Is art thing, we're talking about sports, is such a catalyst for beyond that. You have to care beyond the game. And that is a big deal of friendship. You have to care more than just the friendship itself. You have to care more for the well-being of the other person. So this is what Kareem said. His persistence in the face of my petulance. Could you imagine being a teenager and having this aimed at you at like 19, 20? I'd be bonkers over this, furious. Built a closer relationship between us. I came to the realization that he wouldn't give up on me. I knew he wanted me to perfect the hook so I could be more effective in games, but there was something in his attitude, a patient understanding that made me feel that he was more interested in teaching me how to adapt to disappointment, to push through, to endure. His real lesson about perseverance and adapting has carried me through life beyond the basketball court. So skyhooks and common denominators are the thing. What do you think of the skyhook?
He was searching for a why. It sounds like he came to UCLA searching for a why. Why? What's the point? What's the point of being this tall and being this good at a game? What's the point? Is what it seems like. He was looking for something to point him north. Instead of just wandering around a basketball court for what point. And I think that is sorely missed in a lot of different ways. What's very interesting, right, is the north that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar found was probably a different north than Wooden. If Wooden could have forced him to pick one and picked his values and picked his purpose, would probably have been different. But that's not what Wooden cared about. Yep. He just wanted him to find his.
Yes. And it says that towards the end of the book. It's very, very touching. Like I'll love you either way kind of idea. That unconditional love is unbelievable. Yes.
Right. And I think it's tough to bridge the gap between college and pros when we talk about those duos. That's kind of my point to the ego thing. How many coaches really are like, no, you're going to go my north. You're going to find my purpose and my why. And you better fall in line or else. And that lack of ego, more care for his players than for himself, translated into a way that allowed Kareem to find his why off the court as well as on the court. In terms of the hook shot, it's one of the probably best things that's ever. It's one of the
unstoppable. Just
it's never been duplicated. Like it's never been duplicated. Now there's a bunch of 7-footers that come through. No one does it. They'll do like baby hooks or like little. You hesitate to even call them hook shots compared to what Kareem was doing.
Well, I mean, Keem was close, but not even close. So it's. I don't know why the skyhook got the same attention as like underhand free throws. It just the same. What do they call it? Blackballing and they push people out. Same idea. I just don't understand.
I was up on the line that Wooden was fearful that they were going to ban him from basketball. I mean, that says a heck of a lot to his greatness. Like, I mean, I lived through MJ. I lived through LeBron. Ain't no one been like, oh, are we sure we can let LeBron or MJ play? I mean, they're too good, guys. I think that's going to ruin basketball. It's never happened. Even Shaq. I don't think that ever happened with Shaq. And Shaq would probably be a better candidate just because he was so massive.
Yeah.
And overpowering. So that's very interesting.
So that's where friendship really starts between these two. Is they have the basketball, they have the shared experience, the shared pressure of winning all these games, and book goes into good detail about that. But I do want to talk about the realities of UCLA and what it was like in that player-coach foundational friendship. So if you did not know what it would be like to be a UCLA athlete as Kareem was under Wooden, I do want you to know, because that does matter. Wooden is and has always been very famous for his concept of winning and losing, like we talked about in our initial peak performance in the pyramid of success. He said asking an athlete if he likes winning is like asking a Wall Street broker if he likes money. Sure, we want to win. I love winning, but winning isn't our goal. The goal is hard work. The reward is the satisfaction that you push yourself to the edge physically, emotionally, and mentally. It is my firm belief that when everyone on a team works as hard as possible until they feel that glow of satisfaction in their hearts and peace of mind, that team is prepared for anything and anyone. The winning is usually inevitable. And that is a big deal. And so you see that come up over and over. One thing that nudged Kareem in John Wooden's direction was witnessing how Coach Wooden reacted after a win or loss. So Wooden says that, right? We have coaches say all sorts of things. But how did he actually react, especially when the game was an important one? When we were humiliated on TV in front of millions of fans, this is that game they lost, and his cornea, that's why he wears goggles eventually. They lost. The world, it's televised all over the world. Coach sauntered into the locker room, shrugged, and said, tonight they were the better team. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame. No running down the other team. Okay. Now they replayed the Houston Cougars later in the year. They won 101-69. They only lost by 2 in the other one. We were jubilant in the locker room, celebrating our revenge. Coach Wooden came in, his expression the same as it had been when we'd lost. He didn't jump up onto the team in a crowd like he was at a concert. He congratulated us for a game well played. He made sure we acknowledged Coach Jerry Norman, whose diamond and one defense helped us contain the Cougars' top scorer, Alvin Hayes, who had been averaging 37 points a game, but that night scored only 10. He said, humble in defeat, modest in victory. You were so good. He said, humble in defeat, modest in victory. The last thing I want to say about the reality of UCLA, because I'm going to come back to one thing, is they conditioned the heck out of them. He said they ran and they ran and they ran and they ran. There were no shortcuts in John Wooden's basketball program. You did it until you did it right, and then you did it again. The team that's in the best shape generally wins, he would tell us. We were always going to be the other team that had more gas in the tank. The harder you practice, the luckier you get. And he would be so exhausted. This is Kareem. They practice only for 2 hours. Only. After practice, I was so exhausted that I would have to go back to my room, collapse onto the bed, and take a nap until 9 p.m. Practice finished at 4:30. Then I'd wake up, do my homework until midnight, and go back to sleep. This is not exactly the glamorous lifestyle that people imagine. So that is the reality of Wooden, is that he was relentless. And, as you see from going from high school to college to pros, it takes up more and more of your life. It's all encompassing. Mm-hmm. So as terms of friendship, when a coach spends time with their players, they really do care about them. That is a large amount of your life. And same thing with players. You spend a lot of time with your coach and your teammates, and so you do have to choose wisely. So if you're considering a college coach or even a coach that's at your high school level, know that those relationships matter, and you need to choose wisely. So that's the reality of UCLA. Do you have any thoughts on the reality of UCLA?
Well, I find it interesting because if I was a basketball coach, I've always said this. If I was a basketball coach, we would practice. I'd run them to death, make sure they're the best shape ever. They would defend the entire length of the basketball floor. And then on offense, we just run pick and rolls and moving off each other. Like there wouldn't be any set offense. And I didn't really know that about Wooden. Like I would have guessed there were some set plays or something. Like even I would have like inbounds plays. So I find there's such a freedom in the discipline that he set. Mm-hmm. It's very compelling to me how he balanced those two. We have strict discipline. We're going to run our butts off. No shortcuts. Also on offense, you can just do whatever you want. I mean, I'm sure that's not how he articulated it, but essentially, yeah, we have all this freedom. I find those two things very interesting.
I do too. Is they learned the fundamentals so well that they could react without thinking. The fact that they didn't have to think about it. I really would love to spend some good time watching a UCLA game, like having that footage. Mm-hmm. So let's make a deliberate shift. So that was just the basics. So we had some things. Obviously, Wooden had this time with Kareem, and they dominated the floor. That isn't really the biggest point of this book. Yes, they accomplished great things. All sorts of players and coaches have a lot of time together. It's these next things that made them very different. One thing about friendship is acknowledging, not accepting or condoning the other's mistakes. And when I first got to this chapter, my jaw almost fell to the floor because you hear how much Kareem loved Wooden. And yet he was still open to talking about his flaws. He even says, John Wooden would be disappointed in me if I didn't discuss his flaws along with his accolades. There was a man he wanted to be and the man that he was. Sometimes the man that he was disappointed him. Sometimes it disappointed me. That's a heavy sentence for somebody you look up to. There's another heavy sentence too. It is the burden of being great at something that people expect you to be perfect in everything. But his greatness wasn't in being perfect. This is huge for friendship. His greatness was in admitting to his mistakes, and he made some serious ones during the time I knew him in learning from him. For me, how he handled those dark episodes is what impressed me the most about him and taught me how to handle my own subsequent or frequent missteps. Okay. So before I get to Wooden's faults and mistakes, because I don't want to, what is it called, whitewash him or glamorize him or deify him, this was illuminating. Like, I see you for your flaws and I still love you. Now, I don't, you know, is the phrase, like, you're perfect just the way you are and you could use a little work. So talk to me about mistakes or just flaws. Because I love this part of the book. Like, this is just something when you think of these two people, you don't get to see. And I think friendships have this.
It's vulnerability, right? There needs to be vulnerability. And you know how much that bonds two people together. You talked about how the book was vulnerable. Well, clearly Wooden was very vulnerable with Kareem. I'd be curious at what point Wooden would become that way with his players. It is a hard thing to just jump in and be. Yep. I don't know that I would necessarily advise it because you just can't trust everybody and be vulnerable with everybody, right? So it's not a realistic thing, but there certainly are subtle ways. Again, I go back to ego. Like he was willing to admit his faults. He was willing to admit when he was wrong. There was no like my way or the highway option in that way. Do as I say, not as I do kind of deal.
Yeah, and I want to give some examples of that. So look for the mistakes here and the flaws and tell me kind of what surprises you. And I think Kareem, because do want to make the point about how he handled the misstep. So to illuminate that. Because they're still in player-coach relationship at this moment. So there weren't buddies. We'll get to the stages. So here's some things we know about Wooden that were flaws from Kareem's perspective. And now Wooden is good. He's late 50s. So it's not perfect. He had a temper. He was stubborn. And then the numbered list starts a little bit later. So here we go. Let's go to the numbered list as we go through. The team couldn't help but notice the unfairness of this from a man who had cracked, who had once said he looked at basketball as a way to teach ethics. So sometimes it seemed like he was having double standards, it seemed like. Number two was coach was playing favorites with some of the starters, especially me. So when he got him a hotel room, Kareem got his own room because he needed a king-size bed. Well, they don't have two king-size beds in a hotel at that time. So that he played favorites. Bill Walton was another good example, which is funny because I'm using that in jest. He had laxness. He had a growing laxness, especially through the late 70s or into the 70s, of rules regarding dress, meal attendance, and length of hair. I realize I'm not as strict as I used to be, but society isn't as strict either. Number four was that he didn't give his assistant coach, Jerry Norman, enough credit, and to contribute to that. And Jerry eventually left and became very successful in another arena. Even his wife said she never thought that Jerry got enough credit. Wooden said maybe he didn't. I don't know. It's hard to say. I know I tried personally to always give credit to assistants. Number five was this like loyalty. So he was loyal to a fault. So the Converse thing. So everyone knew coach was good friends with Chuck Taylor. So some players showed up to a team photo wearing Adidas and he ranted about responsibility, maturity, and so on. But even though my players wore them, I had to use a razor blade myself on every new pair to cut the seams so that they'd be right over the little toe. Otherwise, I got blisters. But there was an instance, and this is where I do want to talk about how he handled it, where he benched a player. He took him out of the game. Afterwards, I'll reverse this. So Sidney Wicks, there's two instances. Sidney Wicks and a few other players sneaked out of the hotel to attend a party. Shocker, right? Players sneaking out? No way. But they decided to bring a few girls back. When Coach found out, he gave the culprits a serious dressing down, and afterward, he scolded Bob, the coach of all people, for not holding himself to a higher moral standard as a part of the coaching staff. And Bob argued back, "You have all these double standards." He listed all of them that he had, and he expected the coach would kick him off the team right there and then, but he didn't. He just nodded and said, "Okay, Bob, go to practice." Coach could get as heated as the next person, but in the end, he was ruled by decency, fairness, and rationality. One of the most amazing things about Coach was that he did listen to people even in the heat of the battle. The last one was this benching, and he got into a fight with a player, and in the locker room, he said, "You want to fight me, old man? You've been messing with my mind for 5 years." He said, "In fact, you're always right," this player said. "Edgar Lacey quit, but you were right, and he was wrong. Don Schaefer quit, but you were right, and he was wrong. All these problems, and you're just never wrong. Do you ever think the problem was you?" Now, I can't imagine this. Like, he's Wooden at this point. Like, he's legendary. And this is what he said, and I think this is why Kareem said what he said. "I've given a lot of hard thought to what Bill said last night," Coach said. "I can see what Bill said was not altogether without merit. Now, certainly, I don't agree with the way he delivered his opinions or his behavior on the court any more than I condone the way I reacted. But I'm glad we got it all in the open. Anyway, I just want you to know how proud I am of all of you." And when he said all, he looked straight at this player. "And how happy I am to have the privilege of coaching you." He brought the player up. He shook his hand, and they let it go. So he understood the pressure of winning all these games. He didn't kick the kid off the team. And he was able to handle his mistakes and his flaws as a human being without burying people. That's interesting. So interesting. Friendship.
Yeah. The first two, like favorites, double standards. I bet that every team that I've coached, there has been a player who thought I had favorites and who I thought I had double standards, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, I'm a human. Honestly, I can't remember every little detail of everything I did with every person, right? So they're going to feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also come to the conclusion when people are like, "Oh, you play favorites," I will absolutely openly admit it. Yes, number one, I'm human. Number two, I do have favorites. Number three, those favorites actually change fairly often, quite frankly.
Yep.
It's not like it's just a standard thing. There may be a few players that are always on that list. But part of it's, well, why are they there? Why are they on my quote unquote favorite list?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm truly trying to teach and preach them something, and they're exhibiting what I am trying to tell them or teach them, yeah, I'm going to make that noticed, right? And that may come off as favoritism to you. That may come off as a double standard to you. But I think there's just an honest truth of every coach has favorites. Let's stop pretending, no, I don't have favorites. Every teacher has favorites, right? There are teachers' pets. It's going to happen. And we become resentful of them.
Yep.
Yes, I understand that it's frustrating because you're not that person, but maybe there's something internally that to look at and be like, I wonder why they are and I'm not. Is there something, not completely changing my personality to be a brown noser, but is there something that I'm doing that I could change to maybe be viewed differently?
Yep. Well, and to add to this, I said this when I was teaching, and I was very young. I was very influenced by Wooden straight out of college as well. And I stole this from him, but it's like, I'm going to love you all the same, right? And you're going to get what you earn and deserve. And I've had another coach say he does play favorites. The players that are his favorites are the ones that work hard. They put in the extra time. They're, good kids, and they do the things that are asked of the program. Well, of course you would like the kids that do. If you're the kid that goes and sneaks out and brings the girls back, well, yeah, you're not going to be on the favorite list for that.
Right.
I'll still love you and whatnot, but if you're not doing those priorities that Wooden said. But I think it's good to know as a coach, you can't be friends with them all. Like, they don't like you the same. You don't even like them the same. And so I had several coaches throughout my career, and some coaches I was closer to than others. And that's okay. That's called being human.
Yep.
So to expect that you're going to have these 50-year friendships, I mean, Wooden was obviously beloved and endeared by, but he didn't have, he had a lot of players come back, but you see that there were just some that enjoyed his company more than others.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Yep.
okay. I think that's really the point of this is like, you see people's flaws and their mistakes, and just being real. And that's a part of life. So
Yep. That last story, though, the ability to accept conflict, to not take anything that was done personal,
mhm.
to show self-reflection, and then the leadership to accept what happened, not blame what happened, and be able to move on is not only a key for deep friendships, but it's a key for those players or people in your life that you're not going to be best friends with, but you need to have that respect, camaraderie. It's going to deepen that, and everyone's going to learn from it. I mean, for me, the thing that stuck out in the story is that he embraced the conflict of it. He didn't run away from it. He didn't hide from it. He didn't have to step. What's interesting to me is he definitely stepped in and asserted his authority, but everyone who's experiencing that, that's not how they interpreted it. That's not what they picked up. They're like, oh, this guy's just stepping it. No, right? There are coaches that are like, we don't talk that way to me, da 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 da. What's never going to happen, and move on, right? Just foot down. We're not going to have this. He very much did it, but he did it in such a healthy way.
What a lesson.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe I am to blame here. And then even thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I think that's kind of what we get through this. And it's a good transition to the next one. It's catalysts, crucibles, and comfort creeps. In the book, I how do I put this? Wooden said that he learned more about man's inhumanity to man through Kareem than any other thing in his life. And we think of what Wooden passed away in 09 at like 99, something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's seen life
Mm-hmm.
and he's seen a lot of change. And so we'd be remiss if we didn't bring up the most uneasy and awkward part of their friendship, and it had to do with race.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came to race, Kareem said, we just couldn't find a comfort level. We were itchy and fidgety. During my 4 years at UCLA, we faced racists together. We discussed the plight of Black Americans, and we dealt with racial hostilities among fans. But that didn't bring us closer. This is key. He didn't quite understand that when you're Black in America, everything is about race. So we can see that, that divide there of like, yeah, this is really hard. And he goes into detail about this and doesn't sugarcoat it. So if there is something in the book that is worth talking about and worth seeing is that. So I do want to bring this up a couple of times. His coach in high school, this is just classic Wooden. His coach in high school was a little bit more the traditional, and we think to the 60s, really hard on the kids. He, coached out of fear and scorched earth philosophy. He would embarrass, ridicule you, making fun of you as the fuel that drove you. Wooden, on the other hand, believed that pride in one's performance coupled with loyalty to your team was the fuel. So you can kind of see the contrast. Wooden was very new school at that time. But the reason why I bring this up is that when he was in high school at this school, the coach called him the N-word because he was trying to motivate him. You're acting just like blank. And they were lackadaisical, and he pointed his finger at him, and he came back and they won the game. Obviously, Kareem felt like he'd just been slapped in the face, burned, just destroyed as a human, right? The coach was jubilant after the game. He said, see, it worked. My strategy worked. I knew that if I had used that word, it'd shock you into a good second half. And it did. He beamed at me as if we had just won the father-son sack race at the school picnic. So this idea of the stereotype of the lazy African-American or Black person, and he seemed to believe he was his race savior. But I want to talk about how this tension is handled and Wooden's role in that. He said it was because of the fresh scar of Coach Donahue's betrayal. This is interesting. And I have a question with this, that I kept myself a little aloof from Coach Wooden. Kareem came in with some, I wouldn't say call it baggage, but reasonable trauma for being called what he was called. Listen to what he says. I had been trusting once and had my heart broken. I wouldn't let that happen again. I couldn't afford to. I would force myself to be wary, especially of older white men pretending to be my friend. Now, this is the same guy that, encouraged, picked him up, drove him places, told him to go see Russell, and, all the things, helped him navigate his recruiting. So the quote, the question I wrote down as I was reading was what stories are your scars telling you? Kind of idea. So this is what Wooden's working with. And this is what a friend would do. Okay. Now this is hard. Okay. Now this is after he's done. I just want to illuminate this. This is not an easy topic.
No.
And how would you handle this as a friend? This is how Wooden did. He said, I'm going to read it. Years later, after Coach Wooden and I had become close friends, he told me a story about Coach Donahue. He hadn't told me before. In 1965, after UCLA had won its first national championship, he'd appeared on television. Shortly afterward, he received a phone call from Jack Donahue. Okay? I see you're speaking at a coaching clinic in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, he'd said. I'd like to come down and talk to you about my player, Lou Alcindor. Well, Coach said, he came down and told me that UCLA was one of the 4 schools you wanted to visit. That was the first contact that we had with you. Did you know that, Lou? Or Kareem? No, I said. Long drive, Wooden said. I didn't say anything. 2.5 hours, he said. Has anyone ever accused you of being too supple? Kareem said. He laughed. Quite the opposite. I'm accused of cranking out neat little sayings that are t-shirt ready. I laughed, but I got what he was saying. What kind of man drives 5 hours to help a kid who barely talks to him and never tells the kid he did it? And this is one of the points. Have you ever made a mistake, Lewis? He asked me quietly. Shot taken, points scored. I'm going to go over a couple more things. I do want to pause that Wooden, through a number of these incidents, which are heartbreaking to read. Another lady, older lady from, I'm gonna have to find it because it was just unbelievable the way he portrayed her. People make fun of him because he wouldn't, sign autographs long enough. But another lady called him the N-word, and it ate Wooden up so much. And he actually wouldn't change the story later because it hurt him too much. He said, "Will you just look at that big black freak?" So he couldn't even use the word because it was too painful to store in his memory. And it really opened his eyes to become more sensitive to those different things. And because Wooden was rocking right next to him, and he tried to talk him through it and said, all sorts of different things. But he did react, and he was right next to him, even though he didn't understand and couldn't understand. It wasn't his world. And he couldn't understand that people were like that. So before I move into more of the crucibles and the catalysts, I want to pause there. Because this is hard. I don't know what the topic would be, but to have this, navigate this is really difficult. What do you think about race and friendship or difficult topics as this?
Yeah, it might be the hardest. It could be the hardest topic to navigate, especially within a friendship. Of that, when your friend is going through something that you so clearly can't be empathetic towards, it's a bridge that is so difficult to make and to go over together. I guess the thing that I appreciated the most, especially about that car story, the story that he told him in the car, is it's okay to see the good in people. People are complex. It's okay for them to do wrong things and also have good in them. And you have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that you have to be best friends with them, but that means that it allows you to move on.
Mm-hmm.
Because that resentment festers and it's not healthy. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for you to have that kind of resentment to hold on to and not be able to move on.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there was a life lesson there that Wooden was able to pass on. And I don't know. I'd be interested to hear more how Kareem saw Wooden as he reacted to that situation where he was walking next to him. Did he appreciate, even though it kind of looked like he was swimming in terms of or drowning in terms of what to do in that situation? Did he still feel the appreciation of what Wooden was trying to do?
Let me see if we can answer this. So this is the section I want to cover one more, and we won't belabor this for our time's sake and everybody else's. But when somebody he had Wooden is pushing him away, and they're getting on a bus, right? So they got to go. He can't sign any more autographs. He says, "Look at him, too big to sign autographs for kids. Typical blank," right?
Mm-hmm.
And Wooden said this. He said, "Those people were wrong. You can't judge all people by the actions of a few." Now this is fault or non-fault of Wooden. This is Wooden being who he is. He said, "I know we have penitentiaries and police and laws, but most people are good. They're good." And Kareem comes back and says, "But are they, coach?" I wanted to say. But I knew that he believed that with all his heart, and so much that I wanted to believe it too for his sake. There was just too much evidence to the contrary, especially at this time, 60s, 70s, for through Kareem's eyes. Still, even at a young age, this is the key point I want to make about this before I talk about a letter and move on. He said, "I knew this talk wasn't about racism. It was him worrying about my soul." That's heavy. That was my second heavy point. He didn't want me to become hardened and nasty like some of the activists he saw on TV. He knew me to be as polite, respectful, good-natured Lewis who had a bright future if he didn't succumb to the dark side. He returned to his seat. I hadn't needed another pep talk about the good hearts of white people. Yet at the same time, I had needed a few kind words from someone who has clearly cared about me beyond the number of points I could score. So
I think that's a tremendous lesson. I think it is. We can't walk across that bridge the same way as someone who's truly going through. We can't empathize at all. All we can do is care about their soul. I think that's such a great way to put it. We can only look deeper into the person next to us. We can't change. It's a great story, and I think there'll be people who disagree with the lesson that's being taught there of not turning to the quote unquote dark side, or I would simply say I think there's a way to compassionately fight that works and makes sense.
Yeah.
Without losing your soul and losing who you are as a person, right? That's what matters most. To if you're with someone on that journey, just ensuring that you can do whatever you feel you need to do, but don't lose yourself.
Yeah.
Don't lose your soul. Don't lose your nature. Don't lose your testimony of who you are, who you were raised to be. I think it's a great story.
Well, and they may even not agree, and just to have his back. So one more example of that, and then we'll transition because it's a good transition to our next talk about going through the ringer, broken hearts, and hearts bent knees. But Wooden didn't necessarily agree with Kareem's choice not to play in like they play at college, like a all-star team. He chose not to go because he didn't want to represent the country. So that was the context of this. All right. So although Coach Wooden didn't discuss my choice with me, I had a feeling that he disapproved because Wooden was a patriot and, he was in World War II and yada, yada. Though not because of anything he said or did, even indirectly. I just knew that he was very patriotic. Okay. He had been a lieutenant in the Navy during World War II. I couldn't imagine him endorsing my refusal to play in the Olympics and bring glory to the USA. I found out later, years later, just how wrong I was. Wouldn't it show him this? He received a letter from a Wooden he had never met. A letter Wooden had sent to him in response to a note she had sent him complaining about Kareem's decision not to participate in the Olympics. So it's the Olympics. Until I held it in my hands, I hadn't even known it existed. I opened the letter and began to read Coach Wooden's neat script. This is unbelievable. Dear Mrs. Howe, the comments of this most unusual young man also disturbed me, but I've seen him hurt so much by the remarks of white people that I'm probably more tolerant than most. I have heard remarks within his hearing such as, hey, look at that big black freak, and did you ever see such a big N-word? And others of similar nature that might tend to turn the head of a more mature person in normal times. I am truly afraid that he will never find any peace of mind regardless or not of whether he makes $1 million. He may not be able to afford material things, but there are a poor substitute for true peace of mind. You may not have seen or read about the later interview when he said that there were so many things wrong at present of the treatment of his race in this country that it was difficult for him to claim as his own. Thank you for your interest, John Wooden. Kareem says, I read the letter again and then again. Oh, Coach, I thought, I wish I'd known how you felt, if only to ease the burden you'd taken on to defend me. So that's a good transition. So that was like kind of that next stage, right? So they'd gone through this, some adversity together. And I do want to go through towards the end, going through the ringer together. So the section was broken hearts and bent knees. And friendships don't always have, not between the two people, but the events of their lives. Things happen. And a number of things happen. As Kareem said, Coach Wooden and I both had our knees bent and our hearts broken. Friendship, this is a good lesson, helps you through those times, not because a friend offers wise words or insights about life, but because a friend is there beside you, providing comfort, strength just by their presence. So here's what happened. Lou, or Kareem, got out of college. He went to the Bucks, and he converted to being a Muslim, right? That's why he changed his name. Well, his teacher lived at his house in D.C., and there was a massive crime. Number of people killed. Not his teacher, but like the people around him by black Muslims at that time. Kids were even killed and drowned. It was horrific. And what ended up happening is that Kareem didn't respond to Wooden's, reach outs. He didn't respond to him. No one out there could understand what we were going through. That included Coach Wooden, an aging white guy whose harshest language was, for goodness sake. I didn't care one bit about his pyramid of success, he said, or aphorisms or literary quotes about life and death and God's plan. I didn't need that, and I didn't want that. What I wanted was to hear his voice, to hear the kindness and compassion, so I could believe that those things still existed in this screwed up world where children were drowned over theological differences. So he went, he said if he, or John Wooden, wanted to go through life in rose-colored glasses, let him. But my glasses were blood-colored. I saw people for what they really were. So Kareem stares into the darkness, and then he loses his friend, Bruce Lee, who also dies. And so there's these massive losses. And he says, I didn't want another teacher. One teacher had nearly been murdered. The other was dead. For his own health and safety, Coach would be better off keeping his distance from me right now. Looking back, I regret not calling Coach. I was too young, too proud, and too wounded to go to him. So let's start there, because I'll come back to Wooden, but they're going through the ringer. What do you take from friendship from that? That when we go through hard times, what is there to do?
I think the important thing is that oftentimes we have this thought that we need to deliver this knockout blow of words that's going to change their perspective and cheer them up and change everything for them. I think we tend as friends to get this superhero complex or feel the need like we need to have the superhero complex, that we got to unleash some superpower words to change their whole life around and whatever. And oftentimes that's not it. It's really never it. I mean, maybe I think oftentimes when we do say those things, we completely say them unintentionally. But just a presence of support of I'm here, I'm with you, haven't gone anywhere. I don't know what you're going through. You can tell me you're not. We can talk about the weather. I don't care. I'm here.
Yep.
Is far more powerful than some soliloquy or some point that you have to make. Most times, especially when people are going through the ringer, they're not in a mindset that they want to hear that at all. They
No.
just don't want to be lonely going through it.
Yep.
And you know what's terrible is when people go through the ringer, they don't want to be lonely, but yet there's this push in them to what he said. I don't want Coach Wooden. Coach Wooden shouldn't be anywhere near me. Right?
Yeah.
There's this like thing that clicks on our brain that we isolate ourselves, but at the same time, it's the worst thing for us there.
Yep. And he acknowledges this. I'll admit I struggle in loss. I don't know what to say.
Mhm.
I looked and I'll never forget it. And it's kind of haunted me. I haven't lost too many students in terms of they've passed away. Blessing, right? I mean, you never want to see your kids or, even your students or players die before you. But one did. And the funeral is at the school. And I remember days later, however long this was, I remember making eye contact with the mom. And there was nothing to say.
Mhm.
I mean, I had all the, I'm sorry, it's not enough. And I think Kareem does a good job of this because he transitions and he talks about when Coach Wooden lost his wife and how much of a pain that was. And here's some questions he asked. And this is, and we'll talk about the stages of friendship very, very soon. He said, if I'm honest with myself, I felt inadequate to the task of talking to him, like even picking up the phone. His grief was so overwhelming. What could I do to help? What if I did or said the wrong thing? What do you say to a man who's lost his wife, his best friend, his companion? Do I ignore it and start talking about my season of basketball? Do I keep prodding his raw emotions with questions about how he's getting along? And what ends up happening is Wooden says later, and they do talk. He said, you and I have been through the ringer, Lewis, but we're still standing, and that's what matters. Still standing and helping others to stand. And this last excerpt is when Kareem lost his mother. And I want you to hear just is basically what you just said. He said a little bit later, Coach called me after to offer condolences. So initially, Kareem pushed him away. Kareem didn't know how to react to Wooden, but you can see their friendship growing, right? He called to offer condolences after his mom died. He said, Kareem, I'm so sorry. I know how much you loved her. He said, I did. I deliberately spoke in short sentences because I didn't want to start blubbering. She was a remarkable woman, a truly lovely spirit. Thank you. Silence. Don't doubt, Wooden said, for a single second that she was anything but proud of the way her son turned out. And I'm not talking about basketball. I'm talking about your children and the kind of father you are. Thank you, Coach. Silence. I hope you're not waiting for me to dredge up some life-affirming story or poem that will make it all better, because there isn't one. You just get through it one day at a time. And the note I made was, we help each other stand up and look up through whatever it is.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to read that for the template. Like, that's not an easy conversation.
Mhm.
And you don't want to have that. And, you were right that there is no life-affirming poem or gotcha thing to say. But you're next to them. And that's really, really the thing.
Mhm.
All right. Well, let's wrap. We got two or three more things and we'll wrap. I do want to talk about the stages of friendship as witnessed through this book. Okay. And I'm going to read them. I'm not going to go into the book. But I would like you to pull one of them or two of them that maybe we haven't gotten to. Because Kareem does a good job of this. So I don't think you make it to every stage with every player or everybody. Okay. But I want to kind of settle the debate. Should you be friends with your athletes? Well, let's use Wooden and Kareem as both player coach relationship and onward as a template. So stages of player coach friendships. Number 1 was player coach. He was the coach. I was the player. I follow his rules. I'm playing basketball. Like, that's what we're doing.
Yep.
Okay. Number 2 is he graduated and went to the Bucks, and he says, "Well, now I'm trying to make him proud, like that what he did and help me out. Like, hey, I'm a Bruin for life, and I want to do right by him." But they're not buddies, right? They call each other. They see each other every once in a while. The next one is they got into the more intimate, rewarding, and personal level. And what that does is, from our previous episode in The Good Life, the quality and the frequency went up. So Kareem became a Laker, and now he's within proximity of Wooden, right? So now they get to spend more time together. They hang out, watch movies. They go to things together. They eat meals, obviously, like they did at VIPs. Then later in the development of stage 4, so we had stage 1, 2, 3, is they became colleagues because Kareem wanted to coach. Now Wooden is a whole different person to him because he's helping him learn to coach. What a mentorship. Wouldn't that be nice? Hey, coach, how do I do this? But now they're richer and deeper because they have that empathy back and forth of like, hey, like, this is what coaching is like.
Yeah.
Number 5, which is on 247 later in the book, is you don't have to put on the mask anymore. So no masks. So this is what I call stage 5. So coach called me right away after his aunt passed away. And he said, "How are you holding up?" And he said, "Not great." And this is his dad had dementia, and there's all sorts of things going on. We had reached a point in our friendship where I no longer felt the need to put on a brave and manly face. I could be me, flawed and frightened and grieving. That was cool. That's level 6 or 5. The level 6 is nothing held back, and that's 258. And he said, "Coach, ever since I lost my father, you're the only father I have, and I need you to know how much I love you." Unreal. And then the last one, I don't know if I can read it, is goodbye. What does one think about when sitting in a hospital room waiting for your surrogate father to die? And the ability to say goodbye. And he said, "I berated myself for not being with him more often, for not being more of the man he wanted me to be. But then I looked over at him and I felt calmness. I had become the man he'd wanted me to be. I'd followed my path. I'd raised my children. I'd fought for justice. I'd lived one of his golden rules of being more concerned with character than reputation." And I'm summarizing there. So what are your thoughts on the stages of friendship as exemplified? There's no obviously research on this other than our case study. Any thoughts on the stages of player-coach friendships?
Interesting to me that the mask came off in stage 5?
Yeah.
That seemed very late for me. But I suppose the prior ones can be fairly quick stages. To me, that seems like the accelerant, though. Like, once that happened, it was the accelerant that took the relationship to a whole nother level. And I don't know. Is that, can you fully take the mask off while you're still in that player-coach relationship?
Because this is way after. No, I don't think you can. I don't think you can.
Right. But there certainly could be hints of it. I think it depends on personalities and who you connect with most and enjoy most of who you're coaching and hanging around. But I was kind of surprised that happened so late after.
Yeah.
The player coach part.
Yep.
And even the make you proud part, the second stage, kind of surprised me.
Yeah, because coaching, and just using our example that we have at hand, very fatherly. Always, the father wound of Eldridge, making somebody, proud. You want to make that proud kind of idea. I think that kind of mirrors that father relationship, whether one has a father in their life or not.
Sure.
It's de facto. You just got to understand that that's there.
Sure.
I agree. That's really hard. I have no idea how to pull that off. But I do want to talk about what added to this very quickly is coincidences. So, and I mean that in air quotes as we wrap here, is there's a number of coincidences that John did for Kareem that we learned about after the fact. So you remember Coach Donahue?
Mm-hmm.
Coach had somehow coincidentally arranged a call for Coach Donahue to call him when Kareem was coming over. He knew, this is a coincidence, how much it had bothered me in the past, that incident, and wanted me to have closure. Even more, though, I think he sympathized with Coach Donahue and the heavy burden he carried all the time. So he had him. This is after the playing days, and he just visited, and he had him call him. He had him come over to the house. Coach Donahue apologized again. Green told him he forgave him and realized within a week that he wasn't a racist and that it was insensitive. There's overreaction, easy to do around a kid so cocky and full of himself as he had been. And he thanked him for all he had done for me, which he was grateful to hear. They parted with a handshake and good feelings towards each other. 18 months later, he died of prostate cancer, and he went to his memorial. It was appropriate that Coach Wooden had brought us together because it was his example of kindness and compassion that helped me become the kind of man who could let go of animosity and forgive past hurts. How different Kareem could have turned out, and understandably so. Unreal. Another coincidence. I'm gonna hustle. Is the letter. Is Wooden would clean up the towels and the locker room while Kareem was doing interviews. And he loved knowing he was there, gave Kareem more confidence to speak his mind on these racial injustices and kind of being an outspoken, kind of like Muhammad Ali. He was making me a better person just by walking around and grabbing wet towels from the floor. Coincidence, right? One more coincidence later in the book. So Kareem's dad passes away. Or not even passes away, right before he passes away. And Kareem's dad has dementia, and he goes and visits him and doesn't tell him. So he visits his dad, and then Kareem finds out. He's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" He's like, "You didn't have to do that, Coach." He's like, "Of course I would do that." What'd you guys talk about? Bunch of old guy stuff. So it was a number of those, and you can kind of see that come out and come forward through that. Because of time, I do want to just touch on one is this concept of happy embarrassment. What you don't, and I'm not going to read them all. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 examples, but we're not going to do them. Is called happy embarrassment. And I'll read just 2. And Jake was doing this to me before we aired about the immaculate grid, and I think it's going to infuriate me forever. You can look it up if you want. But the back and forth between Wooden and Kareem, like the jabbing at each other. Kareem did such a good job, and I found 8, but there could be more of these that made the book so easy to read. I mean, we're talking about race, religion, politics, all of the things you don't talk about. And interspersed in there, along with the great history between the two, was things like this. Okay. So you remember when they won that game, and he said, "Humble in defeat, modest in victory." Kareem said, "You were so good, it was almost annoying." That surprised him. "Really? I hadn't thought about that." "Yeah, you made the rest of us mere mortals look bad." He laughed. "Believe me, Lewis, I'm just as mortal as the next fellow." Kareem says, "If the next fellow is Gandhi." So there's examples of this over and over, and I loved each one of them because they would just tease one another relentlessly, back and forth on different points. And that's what friends do. Like, there's teasing involved. I do want to end on a high note. And I'll leave it at that. I'll post them as well. But know that both Wooden and Kareem would jab back at each other with this relentless teasing. So, Jake, let's wrap up about friendship. And I'm going to give you some metaphors, and I'm going to ask you kind of what is the big takeaway? What lasts about friendship between Kareem and Coach? So Kareem mentioned that friendship is like a jazz duet where you each have an instrument, you play your parts, you work together to create something interesting. Friendship, like when Kareem went back to Poly Pavilion, was like coming home, where you're like that, you feel comfortable. You can be yourself. You can take off your dress clothes. You can put on your sweatpants. And what he wished is, as Wooden passed away, his friendship is a never-ending story. So between those metaphors for friendship, as exemplified here, what's kind of a big idea on friendship between player coach, or just in general, that you think we can take away?
I think one thing that stuck out to me was you care for the other person's soul. That goes much deeper beyond just physical well-being, and you really care for their soul. You want their best, their brightest, them to come through and never be lost. And the one thing, as you were talking, the one thing that always stuck out to me about friendship was that no matter how long you're apart from each other, as soon as you get together, it's like you've never been apart. There's just that like unity of souls that when you come together, say, oh yeah, no, pick right up right where you left off. So for me, what truly lasts is people know when you care, not just like about their deepest being, with all of its faults, with all of its problems, that you still care for them, that you still love them, and that no matter what they do, no matter what they say. And I think you said, yeah, what is this book talked about politics and race and all the stuff and things that you're not supposed to talk about. Maybe that's why we're supposed to. Maybe we are supposed to talk about them. Maybe that's just a lie to keep us apart. Because as soon as we do start talking about those things and start seeing those types of things that we hold dear to us, and we start seeing the other perspective, not that we're going to be converted or whatever you want to call it, but as humans, how much we connect, just knowing and understanding someone's viewpoint makes a massive difference. And then just learn to be comfortable with it because we know it. So we're not afraid of it, right? Of course, we're going to be afraid of someone because we don't think we're supposed to talk about the things that we don't understand about them. That's just dumb. That's counterintuitive. And the longer we do it, the more we lose the ability to do it. So hopefully we can start having those uncomfortable conversations with people. And it doesn't happen overnight, but starting to be vulnerable with people. You told me that book was vulnerable. It absolutely was vulnerable. And I think that in of itself teaches us a great lesson to just be you, be who you are, and be willing to accept that it has faults, and be willing to accept that you can make it better too. All right. And that each person can do that. So I thought it was a great book. I think there's a lot of things that you can pull from it. And if there's ever a book to learn about friendship, when you start thinking about two people who are so polar opposite, going through one of the hardest and darkest times in American history, there's, for them to be that close, I think there's so many gems to be pulled out from that relationship.
Agreed. So we'll leave it at that. Well said. Check it out. Yeah. Go get the book, bookshop.org or wherever books are sold, and you get them. You just feel like you know both of these two. You wish you could be in the booth with them at VIPs. And that's something really to behold. So this was book number 2 in our study on friendship. We already covered The Good Life. Do check that episode out as well. We are going to foreshadow with the teammates, which is Ted Williams and his 3 teammates who are very dear friends. So we'll look at that player-to-player relationship next before we wrap up with another practical book about how to win friends and influence people, the iconic Dale Carnegie that Jake is finally getting me to read. So thank you for listening, everybody. Appreciate it. Never stop learning, because we certainly won't. And I'm excited to be with you on this episode and all episodes. as we explore John Wooden's pyramid of success. Jake, anything else? Final words?
The booth still exists, just so you know. VIPs in California. You can go sit there. There's a sign. Looks like, I don't think they've changed the interior of that restaurant since John Wooden last went there, but it's got 4.7 reviews on Google. So I think we have to put it on the bucket list and check it out at some point.
Put it on the board. Well, all right, everyone. Be well, and we'll see you on the next one.
See you, everyone.